My name is Denise Mankey, Executive Director of Washington Native Plant Society, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to webinar number 3 of Native Plant Appreciation Month. We are very excited to celebrate our theme, exploring biodiversity, exercises in community science, which that theme is behind me on our beautiful graphics that we have to share Native Plant Appreciation Month, thanks to photographer Richard Droker. It's my pleasure tonight to introduce Native Plant Appreciation Month committee member Julie O'Donnell, who will walk us through tonight's program and introduce our speaker. Thank you for joining us. Enjoy the show.
Thank you, Denise. So let me introduce the mission of the Washington Native Plant Society is to promote the appreciation and conservation of Washington's native plants and their habitats through study, education, and advocacy. If you're already a member, we thank you. Membership supports native plant conservation and education, and it connects native plant enthusiasts across the state. To learn more about our work, please visit the website and consider becoming a member. Your support is appreciated. As a member of the Central Puget Sound chapter, I would like to acknowledge that I am speaking from the lands of the Coast Salish people. They are the original and continuing stewards of the coastlines and lands of the Salish Sea. And tonight, down to business for our program, we will ask you to leave your comments in the chat and questions in Q&A, and they will be answered at the end of the program. Thank you. Before our speaker begins, I'd like to invite you to attend next week's program on Tuesday, April 22nd at 7 p.m. The topic will be 5-needle pine citizen science monitoring in Washington's North Cascades. So please join us next Tuesday evening on Earth Day. And our program tonight is given by Wendy Gibble, the Associate Director at the University of Washington Botanic Gardens. She manages the Rare Care Program, and throughout her 19 years with the program, Wendy has managed rare plant monitoring, conducted research on rare plant ecology, completed reintroductions of endangered plants, completed seed collections for conservation and restoration, and curated the seed bank collection for rare plants. Wendy completed her master's degree in plant ecology at the University of Washington. So please join me in welcoming Wendy Gibble.
Thank you very much, Julie. Real pleasure to be here, and I'm really excited to give this presentation to the Washington Native Plant Society community, who I know all love native plants and appreciate them, and many of our volunteers are also members, so that's really great synergy. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and there we go. So you can see that. All right. So what I'd like to do tonight is focus on our rare plant monitoring project, which is a community science project to collect scientific data on rare plant populations across Washington state. First, I'm going to start with a real quick overview of the Rare Care Program and how the community science project fits into our activities. And I'll also give a really brief introduction to how plant biodiversity is tracked and how species conservation status and priority is determined, and look at what species are considered rare, which is the scope of this program, this community science program. And then I'll go into the objectives and implementation of the rare plant monitoring program project, talk about how it works and what type of data we collect, and I'll wrap up with some of our findings and future directions. Okay, so let me start with Rare Care. We were founded in 1998 by Dr. Sarah Reichert. Initially, the program focused on research, and that was this first circle here. I kind of schematically laid out our programs. And it was part of her lab. And in about year 2000, the Botanic Gardens joined the Center for Plant Conservation as a participating organization in their network of botanic gardens working on the nation's imperiled plant flora. And about that same time, Sarah formed a science advisory board of botanists working in public agencies and in conservation. And that board was formed to help guide the program's activities. And they identified the first major priority to be a citizen science program to collect data and update records on rare plant populations in Washington. And Sarah was familiar with the community science program run by the New England Wildflower Society or Center. And that was a program she knew about through the CPC. And she thought that they could apply that model here to Washington. So she launched the program by hiring a graduate student to write a QA plan. And our first year of monitoring happened in 2021. So that was our big second circle here of activities. Then in 2003, we built the Miller Seed Vault and started our ex situ seed banking program. And with the expansion of seed banking and with our capacity to propagate plants here, we started working on reintroductions about 10 to 15 years ago to try to augment and introduce populations of Washington's rarest plants. So these are our 4 core areas. They all work very synergistically together, and volunteers are engaged in all aspects of our work, not just the citizen science program. But tonight I'm going to really just focus right here on monitoring, which is our largest program. So the Rare Plant Monitoring Program is conducted in partnership with the Washington Natural Heritage Program, which is a non-regulatory program at the Department of Natural Resources that is responsible for assessing the conservation status of rare plants and tracking the biodiversity state data for these species. Together, we developed the goals and scope of this project, and we have 4 main objectives. The first one, probably the core one, is to update the rare plant population records in the Washington Natural Heritage Program database that they use to assess conservation status. We also wanted to make sure we provided land managers who are managing these rare plant populations on public lands with current information on the status of these populations and their habitats. We wanted to make sure we produced high quality, consistent data that could be relied on. And importantly, we wanted to engage the public in the appreciation and conservation of rare plants. So that's sort of the overview of how the project started. And what I want to do is make sure we're all on the same page about what is a rare plant and how did that get determined. So I want to give a little bit of background on that before I get too much into the program. So you need to know about the NatureServe, which is a network of natural heritage programs and conservation data centers in Canada that worked collaboratively together to track biodiversity data for both plants, animals, and ecosystems across North America. And there are about 60 of these entities, 1 in each state, in territories, and in provinces. And basically, each of the heritage programs or data centers maintain their list of species for their geopolitical area. And you can go to the NatureServe website and query this database that's got this complete record of all known species in North America and take a look at what species are in your area of interest. So I did that. I was kind of curious to see what they listed for Washington, and I found that they list 2,569 species of vascular plants in Washington state. And that's not rare, that's all native vascular plants for Washington. And our state ranked 14th largest in the size of our flora as compared to other states. And as you might imagine, California had the largest flora with about 6,200 plants. One of the things I was really interested in is looking at the density of species by square mile of state. And it turns out that in the southeastern portion of the United States, those states have the highest number of highest number of native plants per square mile, which was actually surprising to me. Might have to do with the lack of recent glaciation in that area and potentially the climate and subtropical connections that they have. But interestingly, outside that region, Washington has the next highest diversity of plants by square mile. And that actually really surprised me. And that edges out California, Oregon, and Utah. So we're really fortunate to have a high variety of habitats in the state, which I think partially is responsible for our rich flora. So through the NatureServe network, these natural heritage programs assess conservation status, and they have developed a standardized method to assign a rank that is used consistently across North America to assess rarity and imperilment. And this is really important from a conservation and a species management, that we're talking about apples to apples as we look at different species in different regions of the nation. So this method uses a set of factors such as measures of abundance and distribution, threats and the severity of threats, trends in population size, and then they plug this into a calculator to determine a conservation rank. And the ranks go from 1, which is a critically imperiled species, to 5, which is a globally secure and widespread species. And these ranks are determined on a global scale, and they are also looked at on a sub-national level, for instance, at the state or territory scale. So for instance, if we say a species is a G1 species, that means it is a global critically imperiled species at very high risk of extinction, and likely due to its restricted range, very few populations, very steep declines, or other factors. So that's, you'll see on my slides, I will label species by their G ranks and their S ranks, and the S rank is the state rank. So the smaller the number, the more rare the plant is. So this map was developed by NatureServe to highlight areas of conservation importance. And the areas that are shown in reds and oranges point to places on the landscape that not only are rich in vulnerable and endemic species, rare species, but they also offer opportunities for conservation impact on these species. So it's a really important planning tool. And they really highlight areas in which we see unique assemblage of species and species that have very limited ranges. So in our state, you can see, and I should mention that this map actually includes animals, but I'm finding that it's really good for plants, and it really corresponds to where rare plants occur in Washington. So in our state, you can see that we've got a very red mark up here in the Wenatchee Mountains, which is a hotspot for biodiversity in our state. The Columbia River Gorge is also another area of high rarity and unique species. The South Puget Sound Prairie has a lot of interesting, unique species that are highly threatened. And then the Palouse and the Blue Mountains also show up as being somewhat unique. So I like looking at that map because it really kind of gives you an overview of where the concentrations of biodiversity are that are most at risk. So looking at Washington, I love sharing this map. It was in our files. I don't know how old it is, but it was developed by Dr. R. Krugerberg. Many of you either know him personally or knew him when he was live, or certainly know of him. He did a lot of the early work on rare plants and plant rarity in our state, and also was very instrumental in the formation of the Washington Native Plant Society. So he drew this map of where you can find endemic plants. And endemic species are any species or taxonomic group that is confined in distribution to a really particular area or have location. So we talk about narrow endemics, which are species that are really narrowly limited to a very small geographic area. So what he's showing here is the frequency of endemic species, with areas with high numbers of endemic species in black, and then less, still high but slightly less high would be the cross-hatching, and then the single hatch marks, and then the dots, and then of course the blank areas is relatively low numbers of endemic plants. And you can see this matches quite well with the NatureServe data. So we have again the Wenatchee Mountains. He's drawing attention to the endemic plants along the Columbia River here. He notes that indeed the Olympics do have quite a few endemic plants and are really an interesting flora. And of course, the Palouse and the Columbia River Gorge also show up. So I think that's always a really fun way to honor sort of some of the history that and contributions of Dr. Krugerberg. So in our state, the Washington Natural Heritage Program is our representative in the NatureServe system. And the Natural Heritage Program, and I'll often short that to WNHP, so bear with me, sometimes I just jump to that. They are a part of the Department of Natural Resources and are a key partner in the community science program. So they track plant biodiversity, and every 2 years, they produce an updated list of vascular plant species of conservation concern, which is this document on my lower left. And that you can get off their website. It was updated in 2024, and in that edition, they list 386 species as rare, or approximately 15% of our flora. As a part of their program and the NatureServe, they also assess a state status as endangered, threatened, or sensitive, which blends the ranking system, the G ranks, with the level of imperilment in our state. So as I said, they update this every 2 years based on information that comes in on the status of the populations for these species, and also assess other species that might need to be added to this list. They maintain a geodatabase with all the known populations or occurrences of rare plants across Washington state. And here, this map has a visual representation of that data set. And that data is important for tracking the health of these populations, or these occurrences of these 386 plants. It's important to know that that wasn't all data that they individually went out and collected. They have pulled together records from a huge variety of sources over the last century on these species. So they look at herbaria records and add those records to their database based on information available on the herbarium specimen. They get very detailed data from botanists who are out doing survey work. They get data on these species from published plant lists, a wide variety. And consequently, this data has a bunch of different years for when the data was collected, and a wide variety of detail in terms of very vague information to highly precise information, locations that were very general. So for instance, Mount Rainier is all that might be known about a population from an older herbarium record, or they might have records that are based on GPS coordinates recently collected. And that's really important. You'll see how that plays out as we do our citizen science program. So their list that they compile includes many of Washington's endemic species, but also some taxa that are more widespread outside our state, but considered rare here in Washington. And also taxa that might have once been more abundant, but have decreased in abundance due to habitat loss and development or other threats. So let's take a look at some examples of that. So here are 3 examples of the types of species that are considered rare in Washington. On the left, we have Hoover's desert parsley. I think it might be my favorite desert parsley. It is a very limited distribution endemic desert parsley found in central Washington, generally along the Columbia River on steep talus. It is only found in Washington. It's not found anywhere else in the world. And there's only about 13 known records for this species in Washington state. So that's a G2, G3 species, very rare globally, very rare in our state, and endemic. And we have a bunch of endemics on the list. We also have disjunct species, and these are species that we have one or a few populations in Washington, but the core distribution area for the species is elsewhere at quite a distance away. So an example of that would be Leis facilia. And we have only one population of this species, and it's located in the Wenatchee Mountains. And the rest of this species is found mostly in southern Idaho and northern Nevada. So this one population that we find in the Wenatchee Mountains might be a relictual of a time in which the species was far more widely distributed, but has retreated in many areas. And then we also have on the list species that are at the edge of their ranges. So Washington might be at the northern extent of a species range or the southern extent of a species range. And so they're rare here simply because we're just at that periphery. And Torrey's peavine is a good example of that. It extends from California all the way up through Oregon, where it's not considered rare. But here in Washington state, it is rare. We have about 9 populations. So it also is a great illustration of a plant that's likely been impacted by development. This species is found in sort of open clearings and open forest woodlands, mostly in low elevations. And that's an ecosystem that's been highly developed in our state. So while we might have 9, maybe historically there were far more populations of this peavine, but it's basically been retreated as its habitat has been developed. And there's quite a bit of species on the list as well that fall onto the list because of habitat loss. Okay, so I'm setting the stage for the data set that we're using for this project because I want to make sure everybody kind of understands the need and why we're doing what we're doing. So the Heritage Program has about 400 records in their geodatabase for these 386 species. And the records kind of look like this map that I show here. It was an example of the mapping for a population of Sixdorf Lomatium or Sixdorf desert parsley. And you can see that there might be actually several areas of mapping just for one record. And then associated with this record will be all the data for everybody and anybody who has ever filed a report about this population in this particular location. But as you can imagine, 4,000 occurrences or records of rare plants takes a lot of effort to keep updated. And in fact, many of the records are not up to date. So I did a quick look through the Heritage Program database to see how old some of the records are. And I found 36% of them have not been updated in the past 30 years. And 22% have not been updated in the past 40 years. And that's a snapshot of today. And I think those numbers, those percentages would have been much higher had we written down those numbers back in 2001 when we started this project, because we've been working on quite a few records. So there is a huge need for rare plant monitoring in our state. There are simply insufficient staff and resources to track these species. And in the meantime, we are seeing substantial changes in habitat, land use, climate that puts these species at risk. And if we don't have the information that's recent, then we don't really know what's going on with these rare plants. So it's really a critical need. And we have an opportunity to not only make a significant impact on improving the quality of the data that is being used to make management decisions, we also have an opportunity to increase public participation in science and biodiversity conservation that starts to generate the interest in stories in our communities that to make people aware of what the issues are for conservation and hopefully generate support for it. So I'm going to turn to now how we conduct or carry out our program for rare plant monitoring. And I'm going to start with our planning that happens each year. In November, we start thinking about assembling our list of priorities for rare plant monitoring to put out to our volunteers in early winter. So we develop a monitoring priorities based on 4 criteria. In November, we send out emails to all of our partners in the organization at public agencies and land trust and other places that we work. And we ask them if they have any priorities for monitoring in the upcoming year. And that is absolutely our highest priority. And we get a lot of requests. So a lot of land managers, they don't have time to get out to these populations, but they need the information. And those are the kind of requests that we get, and we put those very high priority. We then also put on the list sites, populations that we have visited in past years, and either our volunteers didn't find the sites, or they did, but they either couldn't finish the mapping and the data collection, or the ID was uncertain. So those are priorities to get back to. Then we also round out the list and add some more species and areas by selecting some older occurrences that need updating. And right now we are looking at sites that haven't been monitored in the past 20 years in Central and Eastern Washington, and sites that haven't been monitored in the last 10 years in Western Washington. And that's really a function of the fact that, first of all, there's more rare plant populations in Eastern Washington, and we still haven't even gotten to those records for the first time. So we're still trying to work through that backlog that was there when we started this program 24 years ago. Whereas on the west side, we've gotten through pretty much all the sites that are on public lands. And so now we're going back and we're revisiting about every 10 years and updating information that we collected 10 years ago on the same populations. So we are catching up on the west side, but not yet on the east side. We also give a little bit more priority to endangered and threatened species, and we try to revisit those about every 5 years. Once we have that list, we compile it. We shoot for about 300 records that we put onto an assignment selection list, and we post that to our volunteers in late January or early February. And volunteers get to browse that list and choose assignments that they want to do. So it depends on their availability, when they'd like to go out, what species they are comfortable identifying, how far they want to travel, what type of terrain and habitats they want to work in, and how difficult it is to reach the site. So our volunteers work independently in the field, and so it's important they find something that's going to really work for them. Once they've made that a selection, we at the Rare Care office put together an assignment package for them, which includes mapping out of the Heritage Program's database. And this map is an example of what that might look like. And this particular occurrence has 6 areas where it's mapped in this wetland. And then we also provide, on the left here is a printout of all the data that resides in the Heritage Program's database for that particular occurrence. And we provide that to our volunteers. We also include any monitoring permits that they would need, and we give them the contact information for the land manager at the lands that they will be visiting, and they are asked to contact land managers a week in advance to make sure the managers know they're going to be on site and find out if there's any access issues they need to be aware of. Our volunteers are responsible for doing all of the upfront research before they actually visit the site. So they need to figure out how to get there, how to ID the plant, when to visit based on timing their visit to coincide with when they should be able to identify it with fruiting or flowering structures. And they're also responsible for their own transportation. So our volunteers get to do the fun part. They get to visit some amazing sites across the state and collect data on these rare plant populations. Of course, the first challenge is taking the information on the map and the record and trying to figure out where these populations are. Sometimes they have very detailed directions that will put them right smack on the population. Sometimes there's absolutely no directions. Sometimes the mapping is wrong. So it's a bit of a treasure hunt, and it's always very rewarding to actually find the plant. But that's just the beginning. And we ask our volunteers to collect and record a variety of data on the rare plant population, including mapping the perimeter with a GPS unit, estimating population size, noting the phenology of the plants, what the associated species are, characteristics of the habitat, what invasive species might be on site and threatening the plant. Any other management concerns, such as ORV tracks or broken fences or culverts that are, clogged and spilling water over the population. They also take pictures to document it, and they summarize all their information on this standardized form we have for this project. And this form is really helpful for us because we've structured it so that we're consistent in the type of data everybody is collecting and reporting. And it's set up to give us information when a volunteer is not able to find a population. So if they don't find the population, we ask questions like, do you think you're there too early or too late? Or has the habitat changed? Or are the directions wrong? And that information is incredibly valuable because that can help the next surveyor who makes an attempt. They might look at that and say, okay, I'm going to actually try the next ridge, or I'm going to try the month earlier. So that's really valuable information. And it also, at times, has led to the heritage program to go back to the original record and maybe reinterpret the information's given and correct some mapping that wasn't reported correctly. So we've really given a lot of thought to how this form is a good communication tool. Volunteers will send that form plus their map and their pictures back to RareCare. And we look through it to make sure we are understanding the information that's been provided. We look at the photos and check the ID and see if we concur. If needed, we follow up. And then we package that entire package up into a digital file and immediately send off a copy of that digital file to the land manager that manages the land where the rare plant population is. So it immediately goes right back to the person who is protecting that species. And at the end of the season, we provide all of these reports to the Washington Natural Heritage Program. And as our key partner in this project, they're responsible for updating all the database and sharing that with NatureServe and with resource agencies. So let me show you kind of how the communication flows for this project. So heritage programs over here on the left, they share at the beginning of the season, they share their database and the records with us at the office. We communicate directly with the volunteers to share information for their assignments. And in turn, volunteers provide back to us the reports based on their field visits. And they provide reports even when populations and species are not found, because not found information is really critical. And actually, that's been a huge, I think, a huge benefit of this project in that historically the Heritage Program was really, their database was primarily a repository for information for populations that were found. And when populations are not found, they would never get reported to the Heritage Program. And I think that's one of the really big benefits of the way we're running this program is now that not found information is getting logged systematically in the Heritage Program database. So once we have the report, we send a copy out to the land managers, and we are working with almost every federal and state entity, agency in the state. We also work with a few land trusts. We do limited monitoring on in national parks. We do that, but it's on a case-by-case basis. And there's just some logistics behind that. We do not work on tribal lands, and we do not work on most private lands. So mostly we're working on public lands in this project. And then we provide that report back to the Heritage Program. From the volunteers' reports go back to the Natural Heritage Program, and they then share it through NatureServe. It becomes available to researchers and land managers, and then the cycle continues. So it's been a very effective communication tool that what I think is the real strength of this program is the fact that the reports and the data that are collected by our volunteers are getting right into the hands of the land managers and the scientists, not only at that particular site, but really across the scientific community, and immediately having impact. As I hear from many of our partners in the land agencies, they're just thrilled to have such valuable information. So let's talk a little bit about how we ensure consistent and high quality data. When Sarah's graduate student started this project, she looked at New England Wildflower Center, and based some of our procedures on their tried and true methods. So we require training for participation in the program, and this is training that's required regardless of your botanical skills. We don't really cover plan ID in the training. It's about what the procedure is and how to do an assignment. We provide a handbook and some training videos. We also do an optional field skills training for additional practice. We provide opportunities for mentoring and partnering to give people even additional opportunities for training. And then, as I mentioned, we have standardized a lot of our forms and procedures to make sure we're getting consistent data with a similar methodology for all of our reports. We review the reports for completeness and to check ID. And the plan ID, we by and large concur with the assessments that our volunteers are making. And we get really great photo documentation that helps with that verification. So we're very confident in those situations that they have the right ID. Because our volunteers are working independently in the field, they're not going out on trips led by botanists. They do have to have some familiarity with identifying native plants, and that doesn't mean they need to be a trained botanist or be fluent using technical keys or anything like that. We just are looking for people who have a solid foundation and know what minute details you need to consider and be comfortable with some botanical terminology that are used in field guides and floras to be able to make the ID and not be overwhelmed by the suite of other species that might also be at the site. We want our volunteers to be successful. We want it to be fun. And if they're going into these sites with very little experience, I think it might be a bit overwhelming. Our volunteers are working in remote places in some cases. So plus is always to have for people who have good, wilderness skills, but that is not required. And we also provide additional training in that area. And a good problem solving skills and perseverance is definitely a plus because, as I said, sometimes it's a real puzzle to try to figure out where these plants are and interpret the clues in the record. One of the fun things we do is every year we do a monitoring weekend camp out, and it's a great opportunity to provide further training opportunities for people to partner up volunteers with experienced volunteers and work with professional botanists as well. It allows us to blitz certain areas, and we go to different places each year and focus on specific species and try to get, a suite of records updated in areas that we may not get as good of coverage. So here's a overview of some of the sites we did. I put this together. It's about a 7-year span of sites to give you an idea of the extent and breadth of the monitoring that our volunteers and all the different sites our monitors have been working. You can see in these pictures. You'll notice on the map that we'd certainly have areas where we have clusters of assignments that are done. So each dot represents a report or an assignment that was completed by a volunteer, and the colors are yellow for state sensitive species, orange for threatened, and red for endangered. And you'll notice that they certainly cluster in areas where I showed you earlier the maps of where we have a lot of endemic species like the Wenatchee Mountains and the Klickitat. So that also, again, is showing up in our data here. But you'll also notice that this map is also impacted by where we have clusters of volunteers. So we have a pretty high number of volunteers in the Puget Sound region, and so we get pretty good coverage in Western Washington, and that's just a factor of population density. You can also see on this map that there's some holes. So big hole in Olympic National Park. As I said, we are monitoring in the parks. And then again, you can see the reservations here, Yakima and Colville. We're not working in those areas. And also the wheat fields of eastern Washington don't have a whole lot of rare plants, so you don't see a lot of dots in that area. So let me share with you some of the numbers. I had a fun time compiling 24 years of reports and data. And if you're not a numbers person, this is not that important. If you are, I'll take you along the story. We've had 1,348 records in the Washington Natural Heritage Program that we've worked on and provided. And many of those we've visited more than once, either because they took multiple trips or they were so big it took multiple trips to just complete the monitoring. And that represents, excuse me, that 1,348 represents about a third of all the records in the Heritage Programs database. If we take out the records that are on private lands where we don't work, on reservations and in national parks, we've worked on about 51% of the records in the Heritage Programs data set. We have successfully relocated the populations on 71% of the sites. And in the course of our work, our volunteers have discovered 161 new sites for rare plants around Washington that they have subsequently filed a report. So that data will get entered into the Natural Heritage Program database. We've trained 630 volunteers over 24 years, and volunteers have contributed 64,500 hours, which is absolutely phenomenal. So I thought it would be fun to take a look at a few results for a few plants that we have done quite a bit of work on, to see how this information is reflected, or what it says about the status of these plants. So let me first start with Washington's Jacob's Ladder. And this is an endemic plant found only in the channeled scablands of Washington state. It is a G2 state threatened species. There are, I believe, about 44 records in the Heritage Program, which is reflected down in this pie chart. So the green on the pie chart is the sites that Rare Care has monitored, and we've done 20 of these sites, and we haven't done 24 in purple. However, 23 of the 44 sites of this species are on private lands. So that means we have done all but one of the occurrences that are on public lands. So the bar chart up here reflects our results. And what I tried to do, remember that the data in the Heritage Programs database is highly variable. So some of the old records might just say plants found. So if we go and our volunteer finds the population and says, oh, there's 100 plants there, on a situation like that, I have no way of knowing if that represents any kind of change in the population size. So those visits and those records, I say, cannot determine if there's been a change in population size. So this chart shows if there's been a change. I've got much more, similar, fewer, much fewer, or not found, meaning we did not successfully relocate that. So again, these are qualitative assessments on my part, because there's so much difference between methodology amongst the many surveyors who've been at these sites that you can't, I think, reasonably make a quantitative assessment about how much decline there's been or how much increase, but we can make some qualitative assessment. So on our case, for the 20 sites that we visited, 2 were not found. We had 1 that we couldn't determine a change. We had 3 that appeared to be smaller populations or fewer plants than previously reported. So that, if that I feel pretty good about in terms of, yeah, our volunteer didn't find as many plants as previous reports at the same mapped site. But then we had maybe a total of 14 sites that were similar in size, or even potentially we found more than previous surveyors. And that might represent that these populations have expanded, or it might just simply be that we detected more plants in our visit as compared to previous surveys. So, however, I was pretty encouraged by the data when I looked at it, because this species occurs in wetter areas in the shrub steppe, along streams, on the terraces, and in depressions. And these sites tend to be really weedy. A lot of them have grazing, and they're highly impacted sites. So, in fact, many of our volunteers, when they reported on their monitoring, almost all of them report heavily invaded by white top and cheatgrass and knapweeds. Some volunteers report that there's changed hydrology, but so far it seems that the Washington Jacobs ladder seems to be holding its own in these environments. But we'll keep an eye on it for sure, as it is found nowhere else in the world. Here's another plant that occurs in Western Washington. It's also found in southern BC and Oregon, tall bugbane. And we have, so this is a really distinctive plant in the Ranunculaceae family. Its habitat is sort of shady, old growth cedar with a mix of deciduous species like red alders and maple. And it also grows on the edges and small openings in the forest. So it's definitely been impacted by timber activities and associated road development, residential development, and some recreation. We've visited 23 of the 40 occurrences. All of the sites that we have not visited, the 17, are on private land. So we have visited all the ones on public. So we visited 23, and you can see on our chart right here that we had 7 that we did not successfully relocate. Some of these we're still working on and still revisiting, but that's a pretty high proportion. It's almost, I think it's around 30%. And then of the ones that we did find, we had a variety from, about 6 that were smaller or much smaller, and approximately 6 that were similar in size or larger. And our volunteers have actually found 3 new sites for this species, so that'll add to the heritage program's data. So again, seems like there is some impact to this species in terms of we're potentially losing some of the sites in areas of high impact. But other ones seem to be holding on okay, and there might be other undetected populations out there. I thought it would be interesting to also look at a couple alpine species, considering that we're all worried about climate change and how that might be impacting plants in our state. So we've been working on snowy cinquefoil for quite a few years. This is a plant that grows in high alpine sites in the interior in Okanagan County to generally above 7,200 feet, found in alpine scree and fell fields. So it's in an area that doesn't have any developmental pressures, but certainly climate change is a factor in its alpine setting. So we have visited 17. And we've got 3 more that we've got to work on. There are 4 sites we haven't found. There's quite a few sites, about 5 that we did find, but previous records simply said the plant is here, so we can't determine if there's been a change. For the ones that we did find, we found that about half of them are similar or larger than previously reported, and half are smaller. So again, that seems to be holding on okay, but of course we are not finished, and we still have 4 sites that we have not been able to relocate. Another alpine species I took a look at was Glaucus gentian. This also occurs in the very northern extent of our state in high elevation sites in the Pasayten, and there's also a couple sites in the Cascades near Mount Baker, generally above 6,200 feet. Both the last species and this species are considered to be highly vulnerable to climate change. This species occurs on hummocks and seepage areas in moist alpine and subalpine meadows. So if we start seeing a change in hydrology and rainfall or snowmelt, that could really change this ecosystem to this plant. So there are 11 sites in our state. We've worked on 9 of them. Overall, we found all of them that we've looked for, which is great. And volunteers have found 3 new sites of this species. So almost half the sites have the similar or more number of species. So far it seems like this is holding on pretty decently. But again, it's going to be a species that, now that we have some baseline data on population size, we'll be able to track how it changes over time. And I think I have one more here. This is a tiny orchid that occurs in Western Washington in the very wet part of the Cascades of North King County and Snohomish County. Its range globally is from up the Pacific coast through the Aleutians and down to Japan. This is the plant. It's a tiny little orchid. It's very easy to overlook, and it's highly vulnerable to climate change. We have 13 records or occurrences in this state. The plants tend to occur in the wettest regions of sphagnum bogs, along streams, wet meadows, in areas of moss, on moss-covered rocks, or in fine soil. So it's pretty sensitive to changes in hydrology, and the populations tend to be very small, just few plants to a couple hundred. So we didn't find 2 of these sites, but we found 8 of them. And we did find 3 new sites near one of the historic sites that we were not able to relocate. However, you'll notice that of the ones we found and that we could make comparison of population estimate, 5 of them, they're all smaller than previously reported population estimates. So that's pretty concerning. Our volunteers reported that the main management threat for this species is impact by recreation, trails, hikers, and campers. So this does occur in areas that it seems to be getting impact from recreational use. And we're even concerned about trampling that our visits might impact on this plant, because it's so hard to spot and it's so tiny. So we're limiting our visits to these populations, and trying to be very judicious about not harming them in our effort to conserve them. So I also took a look at what species we might be having less success at finding. And I think they broadly lump into 3 groups. One is the notorious moonworts, the Botrychiums. We have found, I think there's about 5 or 6 species we've worked on. And we have found anywhere from none of the sites for these species to about 44% of the sites. They are really tricky. Of course, only the fruiting body comes above ground. So if the plant is not in a reproductive state, it is not above ground. And some years it doesn't produce a fruiting body. So that is challenging. But on top of it, I have found that Botrychium's moonworts take a special eye, and some people are really good at spotting them, and that might be 20% of our population, and 80% of us don't see them at all. It's like we're colorblind to moonworts, and I fall into that group of people. So those have been tricky. We've also had less success for sites and species that occur on difficult terrain. An example of that is Brewer's Cliff Break. And this is a picture here of where this plant hangs out. And they're very high exposure sites, and a lot of people would just not be comfortable walking into these areas to try to relocate these species. So I think we've only found about 33% of these sites, and you contrast that with the Sierra Cliff Break, which we've also worked on, and I think we've found about 78% of them, but those are not on cliffs. So I think this is mainly an issue of terrain. We've also had a similar experience with the Clackamas Crytalis, the Crytalis aquagelidae. It occurs in really steep little ravines that are heavily vegetated and very difficult to get into. And we just haven't had great success there. And then annuals have been tricky, mostly because of our methodology for how we compile our list. We have to pick our assignments and compile our list in the winter before we know if the year is going to be a good year for annuals. So there's some years in which we have annuals on our list and it's sort of a drought year in the spring, and we don't get, the annuals just don't come up. And then every once in a while, we'll get a really good year and we're able to locate some of these populations. So we need to think about ways to be a bit more nimble to take advantage of those years when we've got good spring rainfall to catch these species. All right, so I think we're making tremendous contributions to species management with this project. Our volunteers are identifying some immediate and long-term impacts that our land managers are using to prioritize basic land management, like repairing fences, doing herbicide sprays or invasive species pulls, which is incredibly valuable. On top of it, they use the data to assess changes in land use. For instance, if a timber harvest is proposed, they now have the up-to-date information on a rare plant population that they can use to assess an impact of the proposed activity. And I think these assessments have a lot more weight when they can say, yeah, this species was just seen, it's there just a few years ago, as opposed to, well, I have a record from 30 years ago, but I don't know if it's still there, but I think we should consider it. And I can imagine that in some cases that type of record might be downgraded in the assessment. So it's incredibly valuable for these type of considerations in our federal agencies and state agencies. Our data is also really making a huge impact on updating the information in the Washington Natural Heritage Programs database. And they can use this information to assess population trends in abundance, habitat conditions, and revise the mapping, and then use these to make changes in state ranks and conservation status. I will also say that our volunteers have been doing some good documentation on the type of threats that are out there. And that's also important for management and conservation activities. It seems that the big consistent theme, no surprise, is habitat degradation and invasive species across the state. But we've also identified other threats like broken fences, RV tracks, damaged culverts, trampling, and even succession. If you have an early cereal species They like the Montia diffusa, branching Montia, they're going to be transient on the landscape, but if the forest closes over in that situation, you will see these populations disappear. Here's a great example, this picture of a couple of volunteers who monitored a small trillium population on the Washington Department of Transportation right away, and they found it was being overrun by yellow archangel. So they coordinated with their land manager at WashDOT to do a weed pull and went out there with some garbage bags and pulled all the Limiastrum out of the population, packed it up into the bags, and put them out by the side of the road. They were picked up by the DOT crews for disposal. So they definitely went above and beyond. And I love highlighting their work. So future directions, we're thinking about constantly trying to improve and become more efficient using technology to speed our data compilation and synchronize our databases between us and the Heritage Program. We're looking for ways to expand group monitoring opportunities, and it specifically involve more staff-led opportunities, and that would open up our ability to offer volunteer opportunities for students and underserved communities, and that's a priority for us. It's somewhat going to be driven by funding, but really a high priority for us. And then we're thinking about partnering with organizations who are working on pollinators, because as we're seeing the impacts of climate change and habitat degradation, we really need to know what's going on with the pollinators. And that's sort of a missing piece of the puzzle. We try to collect some cursory information on pollinators, but it's not, that's going to be a whole separate effort that we would like to develop out. So let me just wrap up by encouraging everybody to get involved one way or another, either with us or with the Native Plant Society or your local land trust or restoration program. Learn about your rare native plants, share your love with other people, and support the organizations that are doing this great work. And with that, I just want to thank everybody, and tremendous shout out to our fabulous volunteers who do stunning work. It is such a pleasure to be able to work with so many talented people. And big thanks to all of our funding partners who help support this program, including the Native Plant Society. And with that, I'm happy to take questions, and maybe we can look. I don't know if there's anything in the chat, Julie, because I haven't been paying attention, but we're happy to either field those questions or whatnot.
Right. That was so fascinating. Your work is so interesting, and to compare and to help us understand the details of how you look at these populations of rare plants. Thank you so very much for sharing that. And I'm hoping I'm giving people, I see one question has popped in there and several comments. And oh, someone asked, your favorite lomatium, and they kind of chuckled at that, haha. To pick one favorite lomatium. Not easy, I guess. So,
It's not easy. There is a lot of great ones, that's for sure.
right. And then someone in the middle said, I'm so curious about this plant, but I'm so sorry. Now that we're at the end, I'm not sure what plant that is. So if Elliot would like to put a more specific question in the Q&A.
Was it a plant on one of my slides?
I do believe so, yeah.
I was trying to label them all, but I'm sure I had a few that didn't get labeled.
And curious, the pulmonium.
Oh,
Okay.
Washington pulmonium, yeah.
Yeah, so, okay, and now we have another, I'm still in the chat, I'm not getting over to the Q&A. Is Trillium parviflorum considered rare?
Yes, it is. It's a state-sensitive species in our state, and I don't know off the top of my head how many populations. It's mostly, in the South Puget Sound prairies all the way down to Oregon. And certainly its habitat has been impacted by agriculture and, development in the Puget Sound prairies.
Thank you. That was the question in Q&A. Thank you for putting that right there in the chat. Well, it works both ways. We go back and forth. So I just totally enjoyed that, and it makes me want to get out in the natural areas and do that work. You might pick up a few new volunteers after this program. I hope you do.
Fabulous. That would be fabulous. I should say that we do offer the training once a year, and we open our volunteer applications on December 1st. So the next opportunity will come around for 2026. We've pretty much completed our trainings for this year.
Okay, so I'm going to invite people. I'm going to make a closing statement, but I want to invite you to continue to add comments or questions, and we'll circle back to those when I'm done. So I would like to thank everybody who's in attendance, and especially all our members. Thank you for your ongoing support, which allows us to bring you these great programs. Also, you are invited to follow the work of the Washington Native Plant Society on our webpage, and especially join us this month in community science activities, either with your local chapter, and additionally, we have a BioBlitz starting April 20th to 30th, and you can learn more at WNPS.org. And I believe Denise is going to put something in the chat about that, because she would like you to send her information about your BioBlitz so that it can be under the umbrella for the entire Washington Native Plant Society. And that will link all the data together. So that's just a great way to involve the community. Families, schools, individuals, or groups can participate. So we welcome and invite you to that. And again, I will remind you to join us next Tuesday. All right, thank you, everyone. So I don't see that. Okay, one area where it is found. Oh, let's see. So they were talking about, we have woohoo, another great presentation, Wendy. And I would second that. And then we have one area where I think they were referring to Trillium parviflorum. One area where it is found, they pulled a lot of snowberry and small trees, blackberry, open to more sun now, concerned not enough shade. And yes, they did confirm Trillium parviflorum. So, okay. Thank you, everyone, for those comments. And we are welcoming Denise. She has a little more to say to you. So thank you for everyone who has joined us tonight. And we hope to see you again next week. Here's Denise.
Hey, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Wendy. Wonderful talk.
Thanks for inviting me.
Okay, there we go. I posted in the chat information about the BioBlitz. We're very excited. If you have an individual project or your chapter has a project that hasn't posted yet, create a project, send me the title of the project. We'll pull it into the umbrella. We're very excited for the next e-news that will go out on the 7th, no, next week, the 23rd. We're going to publish the map of what we have so far. And then, of course, as people continue to collect over the end of April, we'll end up with more and more collections across the map of Washington. So it's a fun, exciting experiment, especially for first-timers to iNaturalist. So thanks for joining us. Send me an email and we'll make that umbrella bigger and bigger. Thank you for joining us tonight, and we'll look forward to seeing you all next week. And do reach out to Wendy and sign up for Rare Care.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Denise. Thank you, Wendy.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Very good. Good night,
Good night,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you.